third Reefs Go live, Healthy Reefs Over Time. We're coming at you live from the Bloody Bay Marine Park at the dive site Meadows, just off the coast of Little Cayman. I'm Matt, I'm a research technician here at CCMI, and I'm going to be your topside host for the day. Under the water we've got Katie, who's wearing specialised scuba gear so she can keep in contact with us on the surface and you guys at home throughout the broadcast. So let's go ahead and say hey to Katie. Katie, how are you?
Doing great, Matt, and good morning, everyone. And as Matt said, welcome to Meadows, beautiful dive site here off of Little Cayman. And our team today is going to be teaching all of you, joining us from home or school, a bit about these gorgeous coral reefs and how they change over time, using data from CCMI's long-term research projects. And then, of course, we're going to talk a little bit about what all of us can do to help these coral reefs stay healthy for many years to come.
That's right, it's going to be a great broadcast. Just so you guys at home know, we've got a team of people behind the scenes who are working very hard to keep this broadcast going smoothly. Let's say hey to those guys now. Hey guys.
Hi.
So, before we get started, we briefed you that you can keep in contact with us throughout this broadcast. So just so you know, on the right hand side of your screen there's a chat box, so if you've got any questions or anything you guys want to say, then just give us a shout using that box. We want to hear from you guys all over the world, so I'm just going to go ahead and check in with Katie now and see how she's getting on and whether we're good to go. Katie, how is everyone doing down there?
I think we're all doing great, Matt. Checking in with our camerawoman Fee, she's good, and our safety diver Vic, also good. So I think we're just stoked to get started.
Lovely jubbly. Well, let's get cracking then, Katie. So, we're going to talk to you today about our long-term monitoring. So CCMI has been monitoring the reef annually since 1999, so for the last 22 years. We've been using standardised methodology, which allows us to compare and contrast data throughout the years, and this is also used in the wider Caribbean region, so we can compare and contrast data from different locations. Katie, could you show the guys how we use some of these methods, please?
Absolutely. So I'm just going to ask our safety diver Victoria to bring me a few of these important underwater materials that we use to survey some fishes while here on the coral reef. Thank you very much, Victoria. Let's give a little wave. Awesome. Thank you. So we do a variety of studies on this coral reef that you see all around me, but of course, one of the things we want to monitor is the fish populations. So you students joining us from in school or maybe in homeschool will want to pay special attention to this because we've actually got an engaging worksheet developed by Miss Victoria on this methodology I'm about to show you. So our researchers will use this transect tape and this T-bar to collect a ton of information on fishes here on this coral reef. Basically, this transect tape we attach to a fixed point on the benthic habitat or whatever we're studying. It can be the sand flats, the hard bottom, or of course this coral reef. Starting at a fixed point, we run it across the reef so that we get a total distance that we want to survey. Once this transect tape is laid out across our survey area, then we will use this T-bar, which, as you can see, has these black and white bars on it. These bars show us 10 centimeters of distance for a total of 1 meter in length by 1 meter wide. And after we've laid that transect tape, we'll use this T-bar to swim along the transect, collecting data on the fishes that we see. Now, these bars are really helpful because if we know that these are 10 centimeters in length, we can use them to measure the fish that we see in front of us and get a size estimate from tip to tail. Now, we can also collect data using this data sheet on the species of fish that we're seeing, how many of each species, how many different individuals overall. I mean, really, the possibilities are endless.
Sweet. Well, Katie, thanks for that demonstration. So what we're going to do with you guys at home is we're going to share some of our key takeaways from our data analysis. So firstly, I'd like to share with you guys that parrotfish density has stayed constant since 1999, which is really cool. So density is basically the amount of fish across the transect. So as Katie said there, we would swim along the transect and we'd basically just count the fish in that area. Katie, could you share with the guys at home why parrotfish is so important to our reefs?
Totally. So we have actually been seeing some parrotfish on this reef. Ooh, maybe you dive buddies can swim a little bit closer. There's one just here, and this parrotfish is doing exactly what we want it to keep doing, which is nibbling at that macroalgae on the reef. And the reason that that's so important is because you can see that it's taking that algae, scraping it with its little tooth plates, and when it takes that macroalgae off the reef, it's allowing space for corals to grow. And if we didn't have key herbivores like this parrotfish doing its job of grazing all over the reef, there would be more competition and less space and less area for corals to settle or to grow quite large.
So they are definitely one of the major organisms for helping control algae on the reef. I've just got a couple of shout outs to make, Katie.
Sure.
We're going to say hey to the students from Montessori by the Sea.
Oh, excellent.
And to the 4th grade students in Shelby Township, Michigan.
Oh, excellent. Thank you both for joining us from Michigan, the United States, and from here in the Cayman Islands.
Yeah, that's super sweet. So, going back to these good parrotfish, so for 90% of the day, these guys can graze algae, which brings us nicely onto our next point. So since 1999, our data has shown that algal cover across Little Cayman has decreased by 14%. Katie, could you show some of our dive buddies down there what we did look at when we look at our benthos?
Sure. So we might as well use this little patch of reef right here because there's quite a few different species. So there's a large amount of biodiversity. So here we've got some stony corals. We've got the mustard hill coral. Next to that we've got some lettuce coral. We've got some macroalgae, the Y-branching algae, and the green lobed algae. We've also got some parrotfish or some branching species of coral. So when our scientists are surveying the benthic habitat, what they're doing is looking at the overall cover of the coral reef and what the species are that are representing this given area.
Yeah, Katie, could you also let us know about how algae and coral are in competition with each other and why it's such a problem for our reefs?
Sure. I mean, we can kind of see it right here where we have some algae growing in between two different kinds of coral. This is the lettuce coral, as I said earlier, and this is the mustard hill coral. And you've got some macroalgae growing in between them. Now, this macroalgae grows quite quickly because it loves all of this sunlight coming down onto the reef, and it loves warm waters that it grows sometimes 1 to 2 centimeters a month. Whereas these corals, they're much more slow growing. So they only grow 1 or 2 centimeters every year. So if we have a reef with lots of macroalgae, it doesn't allow a lot of space for these slow-growing corals to grow larger. That's why those parrotfishes, like we saw earlier, are so key to helping to keep this macroalgae down.
Sweet. And Katie, just going back to those parrotfish, our guys at home have answered the poll, and over 80% understand why parrotfish are so important to our reef, which is really cool that you guys are getting it.
That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear it, guys.
For sure. So, that brings me on to my next point. Katie talked a little bit about measuring the coral and the algae, and it brings me on lovely onto this next point, which is coral cover has remained constant since 1999 in Little Cayman, which is pretty cool. But we do have some things with that, which are surface area of coral is decreasing, and we are losing these big boulder corals, and we're gaining more species such as Parrotfish, which is the mustard hill coral, and Agarecia, which is the lettuce leaf coral. Which, Katie, could you point some of these out to us down there?
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at the reef over here. Let's see what the reef composition is like over here. So we've got, actually I'm seeing quite a few species of those large mounding coral that Matt just talked about. Like here we have this lobe star coral. That's one of the greater ones. And then down here, we've got a great star coral with these nice, big, fleshy polyps right next to a Fabulata, which is the mountainous star coral. So that's another giant, great boulder species. But Matt was also talking about these smaller reef-building corals, which we have on this side as well. Here we have some of those lettuce species, and of course, some of those mustard hill corals too. So we're seeing quite a few examples on this reef of corals that are both larger and smaller.
Sweet. I think it's also important to tell these guys why it's important to monitor the shift in species on those reefs, Katie. Could you do that for us?
Sure. So, as you dive buddies can see, this reef around me it's quite large. And over time, that's because those larger mounding species that I pointed out, like this lobe star coral behind me and that great star coral, over many years, actually thousands of years, they've grown and built one on top of each other over time, creating this really large structure. Now, if we see a shift from these bigger corals building a large reef to smaller species that are building smaller reefs, then over time, these reefs will slowly get smaller and smaller, which means there's not as much protection for other reef organisms against predators. It means that overall, this reef is going to provide less protection for the island from storm damage, and in all likelihood, it will have a lower biodiversity than a larger, more complex reef system.
Yep, that's very, very cool to hear. And it's nice to hear that we've still got some of them big species down there as well, Katie, on that dive site.
Yeah, just quite a few.
Yeah, so what I wanted to share with you guys is, yes, we take all this data, but what you're wondering at home is probably, what do we actually do with this data? And what we can do with the data is we can share reports with our local, regional, and even global authorities, which can help push change and help us with legislations and policies which can protect future reef health. Which brings me nicely into my next point. So our surveys show that fish biomass inside the MPAs are significantly higher than outside of the MPAs.
Oh, that's awesome!
It's so cool. So biomass is basically an estimation of the weight of fish using a special formula from when we take the measurements of the fish. So I mentioned about MPAs, Katie, so could you tell the guys at home what a marine protected area actually is?
Sure. Well, I believe Matt mentioned it earlier in this broadcast, but we're in a marine protected area right now. This is the Bloody Bay Marine Park, and these are areas of the open ocean or bodies of water that are protected by their governments or governing entities for a reason. Usually it's to provide protection of certain species, or to help safeguard biodiversity, or because they're an area of important natural economic resources. Now, any marine protected area has different regulations or restrictions on that zone. It could mean that this area is closed to fishing at certain times of the year. It could be that this is an area that doesn't allow divers or snorkelers, or maybe doesn't allow any human presence at all.
Oh, sweet. Katie, we've got a couple of questions coming in about
excellent.
our corals. So, Natalie at Montessori by the Sea has asked, why do we call it lettuce coral?
That's a great question. Was that from Emily?
Natalie.
Oh, Natalie. Natalie, I'm not entirely sure, but I guess let's swim a little bit closer so you can have a look. There's a lettuce coral right here, and it's kind of crinkly looking, I guess, and it's got these little, almost like leaves flaking off of it. Maybe because it's crinkly and it's got leaves, that's why it's called lettuce coral, but I'm not entirely sure. Something that I think you should know is that scientists, typically when we're doing our research, we use the scientific names or the Latin names of all of these species because common names can be different from country to country and language to language. So although we in English are calling this lettuce coral, it could be something totally different in Spanish or Japanese, but the scientific name of this genus is Agaricea, so that's how we really know what type of coral it is.
Sweet, thank you Natalie for that. I've also got another one in from Ty, Katie.
Oh sweet, hi Ty.
Who asked, would corals be considered as producers in context of the food chain?
Ooh, that is an excellent
That is an interesting one, for sure.
Of course, leave it to Ty.
Yeah.
You know, I guess I've never really thought about that, but Ty does know that the animal coral has a very important symbiotic relationship with an algae that lives inside of its tissues called zooxanthellae, and those zooxanthellae are definitely primary producers. And since those zooxanthellae are what are responsible for these corals having most of their nutrients, I would say that the coral itself is not a primary producer, because it is a host to a primary producer.
That's a well-answered question there, Katie, and thank you, Ty, for that. We've got another one in from Peter, and he would like to know, what kind of fish do you see around coral reefs?
Oh, nice question, Peter. Well, maybe we can swim a little bit closer. There's some smaller, really pretty reef fishes just over here, swimming around on the top of this little coral bommy. We've got some, what we call ornamental reef fishes. So there's some baby blue chromis, there's some baby brown chromis, some damsel fishes, and some fairy basslets. There's also another damselfish just here. So we've got parrotfishes, we've got small ornamental fishes, like right here, and actually, earlier on in the broadcast, just before we started, our safety diver Victoria spotted a shark. So,
oh, sweet.
All different fish from the whole food chain are down here on the reef.
Well, that's it, and if we protect our biodiversity, then we're going to see more and more fish in the future, right?
Absolutely.
So, it looks like our recently expanded NPAs are working. So our fish are growing larger, living longer, and reproducing more. And hopefully, what we'll see is these fish eventually spill over, so for people who depend on our reefs for their livelihood, like fishers, can keep catching the fish and keep their livelihood protected. So, Katie, could you tell us about the NPA expansion in the Cayman Islands?
Oh, yeah, this has just recently happened, actually. So for those of you dive buddies joining us here in the Cayman Islands, it's quite exciting because in 2021, the Cayman Islands government and Department of Environment were able to expand the marine protected areas across the Cayman Islands from about 15% to now almost 50%, which is a huge deal and a big accomplishment.
Yep, that's a very, very cool thing to be doing. And the Cayman Island governments are proving that they are keen to protect their natural resources and the longevity of the Cayman Islands by protecting these. So we've talked about what our governments are doing, what we're doing here in the Cayman Islands, but we want to hear from you guys at home about what you're doing to protect our environment and reef health.
Yeah, we really do, and this is always one of my favorite parts about these Reefs Go live broadcasts because we really want to hear from you guys joining us from home or from school. We believe that there is hope for these coral reefs for many years to come, but that it's not just up to researchers like Matt, it's not just up to enforcement officers with the DOE or environmentalists. There's something that every single one of us can do to help these incredible coral reefs stay around for many years to come. So I believe you actually have a poll in the right side of your chat box, or it's just a chat question. We want to know what all of you are doing to help be better environmental stewards of this coral reef. And we want you to get creative, so let us know.
Yeah, so Katie, just while we wait for those questions, and we've already got a few lined up.
Oh, great.
I just want to check in with you guys down there. How are you and the guys getting on?
I think we're still doing pretty good. Let me just check. Yep, I'm doing all right. Fiona's still good, and so's our Sadie Dara Victoria. So, yeah, just let us know, guys, what you're doing to really help the environment or these coral reefs.
Lovely, jubbly. So, students from the Little Cayman Education Services are saying hey. So, hey, guys.
Oh, that's excellent. Hi, Miss Meredith, and hello to the students of Little Cayman.
And we've got a couple of questions for you here as well, Katie.
Great.
So, Nevin wants to know, why can't we touch the coral?
Who was that?
Nevin wants to know, why can't we touch the coral?
Oh, that's an excellent one to ask, Nevin. And why don't we come down and you can see for yourself, there's a nice coral just here. And we have a stony coral and we have a soft coral. So this sea fan is actually a type of coral as well. But we call it a soft coral because it doesn't have the same type of skeleton that the stony corals have. And the reason that we don't want to touch them is because, I don't know if you're a fisherman or not, but if you've ever put a fish on your hook, it feels quite slimy, or when you catch one, and that's because it produces a mucus layer on the outside of its skin to protect it from any bacteria or parasites. Believe it or not, corals have the same thing. So we don't want to touch it because we might accidentally take that mucus layer off of the coral, and it would remove protection that that coral has from diseases or parasites in the water column. It could also accidentally damage them as well.
Nice. So thank you for that question, Nevin. And we've got another one which I know we were speaking about earlier, Katie.
Okay.
And Dean wants to know why mustard coral is called mustard coral.
It's an honor, it's, a question that makes sense, but I guess because of the color, we have one just down here we could look at. As you can see, it's the color of mustard. So this is a mustard hill coral, and I guess if you were to squeeze out a bunch of mustard, it might pile up and look just like that.
And we've got two questions, both on the color of coral. So
Okay.
Arman wants to know, what causes corals to be coloured? And Malik is asking if corals can be different colours.
Ooh, both good questions. Let's see if we can find a coral with a different color. Let's swim just over here a little bit, and I can show both of you a coral that's kind of purpley, and it's just down here. It's actually another one of those big mounding corals that Matt was talking about earlier, and as you can see, it looks a little bit purple. We have a fairy basslet kind of swimming right in front of it. So this coral, what's giving it its color is that photosynthetic algae called zooxanthellae that Ty actually asked about earlier, asking if it was a primary producer. That same photosynthetic algae, getting its energy from the sun and giving it to its coral host, is providing that coral host with that rich purple color as well.
Amazing. So, we've got another one.
All right.
So Natalie Hart has got in touch with us, and she has said that to protect our environment and reefs, she's not polluting, no disposable baby wipes, no single-use plastics, reef-safe sun cream, beach cleanup, and the 3 R's by grade 1, 2 and 3. Oh, sorry, that's the 3 R's by grade 1, 2 and 3 at Montessori by the sea.
Wow, you guys are doing excellent at being great environmental stewards for our ocean. Thank you so much, and I implore you to continue doing those small things that really add up over time. All of that really gives hope to our environment and to these coral reefs, so keep it going, guys.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. Those are all great ways to keep our coral reefs healthy. But another way that you can help us is by, at the minute, if you're watching from the Greater Caribbean, we're currently experiencing a sea urchin die-off. So these are the diadema. They are black, spiny sea urchins. And this is what their tests look like, which are super fragile, which we found out the other day. And what you can do is let us know if any of these tests are washing up on the beach. Any sea urchins are not clinging to the reef and floating in the water column. So when you're out snorkeling, scuba diving, walking, if you look for these things, that could be of great help to us. So we've put some instructions in the chat box about who you can contact, and then you can let your authorities know whether you are noticing this. Katie, are there any other ways that you wanted to mention that our dive buddies at home can help the environment?
Well, I guess just to go off of what you were saying, Matt, if we do see a mass die-off of those long-spine sea urchins here in the Cayman Islands or in the Caribbean, another thing that all of you dive buddies can do to help with this is to choose not to eat other key herbivorous fishes on the reef. So we talked earlier about why herbivores are so important, and I think, Matt, you said 80% of our dive buddies said they understood that parrotfish are important for the reef,
yep.
Right? So
yeah, that's it.
If you guys all know that, I would say if we're losing one of the key herbivorous species, we shouldn't be eating or consuming any other herbivorous species, because these reefs will need all of the help they can get to have that algae eaten off of them to allow the coral to grow.
Yeah, and we've got another question here in for you, Katie, which Reese is asking, why do only certain fish go on the coral reef?
Ooh, well, Reese, I think, like anything else, each animal or fish has its own optimal environment, or the niche that is best fit for that fish or that animal. And some species of fish, the coral reef is the best place for them. It offers a lot of nooks and crannies to hide in, has a lot of food on it available, whether you're a herbivore or not, and it's quite a biodiverse place, so it's likely that it will offer something. But there are also other fishes that live the majority of their lives out in the open ocean, but they still may have lived a small portion of their lives on the coral reef as well.
Sweet, and we've got another question in from Charlotte. Hey Charlotte, and Charlotte wants to know if corals are only a home for the fish.
If they're only a home for fish?
Yes.
No, so I think maybe, Charlotte, what you're asking is what else is out here on the reef? And there's a ton of other stuff. We've got a couple other things here. There's some soft corals we talked about. There's some sponges, and lots of really teeny tiny critters that unfortunately are difficult to capture on this big camera. But there's smaller crabs, there's shrimp, there's lobsters, all kinds of small creatures live on this coral reef, not just those fishes.
So that's it, and coral reefs are known to be one of the most diverse ecosystems in the whole world, which is very amazing. It's why we love researching and working on them. So I've got another question in, Katie, and sorry, I've got an answer for how people are helping save the environment from home. So Jaden says that we help protect coral reefs by using less plastic and papers and doing more recycling, which is great to hear.
Yes, I love that. Anybody who's joining us from the Cayman Islands may have seen that recently Ollie Rush swam around Grand Cayman to create awareness about exactly what you're saying, which is refusing single-use plastics. And I think it's great that you don't do that. And even if you do, and you use those plastics and recycle them, an excellent way to be a good environmental steward. But as you said, better than even recycling, choosing not to use plastics at all. So Great job, guys.
Yeah, great job.
I love all of these questions.
Yeah, they're pretty
coming
good,
in today.
So we've got another thing in here for you, and which is year 4, stoked to learn that these herbivorous fish are consumers. What kind of animals might eat those fish to keep everything in balance, Katie? Do you know?
What kind of animals are eating the parrotfish?
Yeah, just what kind of animals might eat those fish to keep everything balanced?
Oh, okay, yes. I love where that's coming from because you guys are right. This complex ecosystem, everything is in balance or needs to be in order for everything to thrive and grow. So even these parrotfishes that we really need to keep these reefs healthy have to have other organisms or other fishes to kind of keep them in check. Now, I think usually parrotfishes are the most preyed upon when they're smaller, because even though we're seeing parrotfish getting really big, they all start somewhere quite small, and I think that's when they're more likely to be preyed upon by other fish on this reef, like groupers or snappers, or as they get older, of course, maybe even sharks.
That's it. And Mary has got in touch and said that their 4th grade uses reusable water bottles, plastic straws are banned, and they try not to use plastic bags as well.
Excellent, Mary. Love to hear that. The more reusable supplies that all of us use, the less plastic ever gets into the ocean at all, whether that happens intentionally or unintentionally. So, great to hear.
Cool. And also, again, Landon asks, what happens when the coral isn't healthy, Katie?
When the coral isn't healthy?
Isn't healthy, yeah.
Oh, well, that is a shame. But when the coral isn't healthy, you may have joined us for our last Reefs Go Live on coral bleaching and diseases. We sort of focused on that exact question. So if you're really interested, I would really encourage you to watch that recorded Reefs Go Live for a more in-depth answer. But overall, if the coral's not doing very well, then eventually it can die. And eventually, if too many corals on this reef aren't very healthy or doing well, the reef eventually becomes smaller and smaller, allowing for less homes for all of the other organisms that you see around me. That's the big answer, but there's a lot more to it, so I encourage you to look up that episode.
Nice. Well, thank you so much, guys. They were amazing questions.
Yes, so many. I love it.
And because we've had so many, I just better check in with the guys down there. How are you guys going?
I think we're all doing pretty good. Yep, Fiona's doing well, and so is Victoria. So I think we've all really enjoyed hearing all of the excellent ways that you dive buddies are being positive environmental stewards, and we've had some really, amazing questions.
I've got another beauty for you here, Katie.
Okay.
So Malik is asking, why are sea urchins so important for our coral reefs?
Oh, sea urchins. I want to come back to that, but oh, you know what? There's a flounder just swimming around the sand, but I think it's just buried itself. Because, of course, they're excellent at camouflage. Sea urchins, that's right. So, we talked a bit about parrotfishes being really important key herbivores on this reef, as our data shows, but also not most, but in particular, the long-spined sea urchin that we spoke about is another key herbivore which grazes a lot of this macroalgae that you see on the reef. So other urchins will eat some algae as well, but the long-spined black sea urchin that we talked about, that one eats the most. So that's why it's important that we have a healthy population of them, even though they look a little bit scary. And occasionally, if you accidentally step on one, you might get a spine in your foot, but you just need to be really careful when you're in the water and respect that that's their home and that they're there doing some really good work for the overall health of this ecosystem.
That's it. And Katie, we've got another question from Daisy, who's asking, how big can a coral reef actually get?
Oh my gosh, well, you can see me on this reef around me. They can get quite large, and that's just here in the Caribbean. If any of you dive buddies at home have ever seen a video of the Great Barrier Reef over off Australia, that coral reef is so big that you can actually see it from space.
That's amazing, eh? And what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to come to the wrap-up of our live lesson today. So if you guys have got any last-minute questions for me and Katie, then please use your chat box and we'll try our best to answer them. Brandon in the UK has got in touch and said thank you so much for the cool science lesson. He learned a lot and hopes to one day become a marine scientist like the guys at CCMI.
Oh, Brandon, that's awesome! We love to hear things like that. And we're so glad to hear that you enjoyed our live lesson underwater. That's the whole point, is being able to bring this reef to you so you can learn some new cool lessons about why it's so important. And if you really want to be a marine scientist someday, go for it. Maybe you can become a scuba diver and get to see this beautiful reef for yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brandon. So, it's been a great live lesson out here at Meadows today. And we've just got another question in. And Mackenzie wants to know, why do you breathe like that when you're diving?
I think Mackenzie means that I sound like Darth Vader.
Yeah, I think so.
So, I breathe like this because this mask allows me to talk to you. There's a little microphone in here, and I have these earpieces so that I can hear everything that Matt is saying. Or also our production staff could say something to us as well. But this mask is full of pressurized air constantly coming in from this tube. So when I breathe, I have to break that barrier, and I sound like Darth Vader.
And we've got another couple of questions in, and Tian is asking, what eats the sea urchins, Katie?
Ooh, what eats sea urchins? That's a great question. Besides a lot of shore birds, like terns and other birds that are always usually in tide pools and things like that, they may get a sea urchin and turn it over and eat it that way. Other things down here on the reef that might eat sea urchins are some species of fish, and even occasionally some crabs or things like that, but it's usually more of when the sea urchins are sick and they're weaker, things can detect that and they'll go in and pick the weaker ones off.
And sea urchins have got a super good defense, right? They've got the long black spines, so I've worked with sea urchins before, and I've come out with the lab completely covered in these spines, and it's not super pleasant. So yeah, if I was a fish, I would not want to go near those guys, right?
Your producer Beth is just going to jump in here for a quick moment because we've lost our underwater camera feed. I'm going to ask our camera woman Fiona if she can just try to adjust the button there. And Katie, if she can maybe signal to you.
Yep, she's working on it.
Okay. While she works on it, I know Matt has another question for you, Katie. We'll just keep our camera topside with Matt until we hear and see that the camera feed for you guys has come back.
Sure.
Okay, so I've got a question in here from Natalie, who's asking, do seahorses thrive on the reef?
Seahorses?
Seahorses.
Oh, I mean, to be totally honest, I don't know of any research here in the Caribbean on just seahorses alone. Oh, Fiona said she just got it back working.
Yes, we're back. Thanks so much, guys, for working that out.
I wish that I could find a seahorse for you on this reef, but they're very cryptic, which means that their camouflage is excellent, and they can be really difficult to spot on the reef. And we have found quite a few, but I don't know of any research that's been done on just seahorses alone. So I would say that would be a great project for any of you joining us today to research yourself and see if you can find some studies on how many seahorses there are on this reef.
Yeah, they are super rare on this reef, and I know our dive instructors and us guys get super stoked when we do see them. So they're pretty cool things. So I'm just going to crack on with the recap of what we've seen today, okay? So we know that our planet has been changing over time. Over the past 22 years, CCMI has been recording long-term data so we can analyse any trends in our reef, in our fish, in our whole marine ecosystem in Little Cayman. We learned that parrotfish density has stayed constant since 1999, which is super cool. And we learned that we've lost 14% algal coverage again in Little Cayman. Coral cover has stayed at 1%. Coral cover has stayed constant since 1999, and our fish biomass is significantly higher in our marine protected areas than outside of our marine protected areas. And finally, we discussed what you guys at home have been doing to help protect our environment and our overall coral reef health. Katie, have you got any last minute messages for the guys back at home?
Katie, I'm just going to jump in here again. This is your producer, Beth. We've lost our underwater camera feed again.
Yeah, Fiona and I are down here trying to work out a couple of things, but unfortunately, I think it might just be a little testy today.
Okay, well that's alright. We'll just let you go ahead and sign off then.
Okay, so I know you guys can't see me right now, but I'm still down here on the reef, and I'm really happy that so many of you joined us today. It sounds like we had so many students, Matt. I don't know if we've ever had so many questions before during our Reefs Go Live, so this was really special. It really allowed all of us to talk about why this reef is so important, and that's what it's all about, right? Because there is hope for this reef, and it depends on all of us, not just those of us who work in marine science or places like CCMI, but it has to do with everybody, including all of you who joined us today. So I'm super thankful for all of you and for your sincere questions, and I hope that you will join us again for World Oceans Day on June 8th, where we'll talk about restoring healthy reefs once again. So thanks for diving with me, and hope to see you all next time.
Yeah guys, thank you all so much again for joining us for this Reefs Go Live. I've really enjoyed it, hope you guys at home have as well. Just for you guys in the Cayman Islands, on the 8th of June, we're going to be coming to you live at the Camana Bay Cinema. The registration for that event is open, so make sure you book in early and get yourself a good seat. So that's it from me, and that's it from Katie, and hopefully we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for joining us.